So here we go, Paul. Do you want to start the live stream?
Yeah, we're live.
Okay, great. And we are in speaker view and we are recording. Wonderful. So here goes. Hello and welcome to another International Manifesto Group webinar. This is also another in a series that we have committed to doing.
Start
the live stream?
Sorry. Yeah, we're live.
Okay, my mistake. I should turn this off. I'm going to start again. Hello and welcome to another of the International Manifesto Group webinars. This is also another in a series that we have committed to doing on Russia to promote greater understanding of matters Russian, particularly at a time when disinformation and fake news, as well as fake scholarship on that country have been proliferating in tandem with the West's proxy war against that country. My name is Radhika Desai, and I'm the convener of the International Manifesto Group, and I will be moderating this webinar. Throughout this webinar, the chat will remain open, and I urge you all to use it, of course, but also to use it politely and with respect to others. At the end of the speakers, we have 4 speakers, and at the end, there will be time for question and answer. And I hope again that will be a fruitful event, a fruitful set of interactions, which should be kept, as I say, respectful and fruitful. So our topic today is Russia in the world majority, and specifically we are going to discuss the report, Russia's policy towards the world majority. And I will put the a link here. Anybody who is interested, I will put the link in the chat. Give me a second here, chat. Here we go, paste. You will find the report here, and I will also share it. This is the report here, which is entitled Russia's Policy Towards the World Majority. The report was prepared, and I'm quoting, following a series of studies, conferences, and situational analyses sessions conducted under the Situational Analysis Program of the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs of the Higher School of Economics, Council on Foreign and Defense Policy, and Russia in Global Affairs Journal, with the support of the State Duma Committee on International Affairs and under the auspices of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. The importance of this document, therefore, cannot be exaggerated. It comes from authoritative intellectuals and agencies, and it comes at a time when Russia's foreign policy is undergoing what may be the most massive reorientation, certainly since the Russian Revolution, but some may argue its biggest reorientation of modern times. Ironically, we are discussing the matter on a day when Russia is voting in an election widely expected to underline domestic continuity under President Putin, while internationally, we can still hear the crashes of the collapse of Russia's old foreign policy, while this report charts a completely new way forward. Russia's policy towards world majority signals Russia's turn away from the West and towards what top foreign policy intellectuals, casting around for a label to refer to the grouping that they were now joining, dubbed the world majority just last year, I think. Let me give you just a small flavor of some of the report's principal arguments. It argues that Russia's foreign policy space is split into 2. A US-led Western coalition conducting the proxy war against Russia and imposing sanctions and whatnot, and the rest of the world, which the report calls the world majority. The report argues that the 2 are in contradiction, and the former's universalizing drive cannot prevail over the latter striving for sovereignty and a striving that the report expects which will create a new future of cultural and civilizational diversity. I'm also quoting the report here. The report also sees the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement as the vanguard of the world majority, the institutions that are likely to build the infrastructure of the new world order. The report recommends and envisages that Russia will play a leading role in the creation of this new world order. And it argues that in order to do so, the whole apparatus of Russia's foreign policy, most broadly conceived, that is, including not only the relevant state agencies, but the universities that produce the knowledge about the rest of the world that Russian diplomats may imbibe, the media that produce discourses about it, the programs that offer aid to the rest of the world, other countries in the world, the programs that promote people-to-people contacts, and even the apparatus of organizing international sporting events, obviously a major priority for Russia, must be reoriented away from their focus hitherto on the West and towards the world majority. I've always thought that fundamental analysis is usually occasioned by fundamental challenges, and this report, coming at a critical moment for Russia, certainly its most critical moment since the end of the Soviet Union, contains such fundamental thinking and rethinking. That it really shows us, it casts important light on what the world looks like, not only to the intellectual leadership of Russia today, but also to the rest of us. That is, it reveals many interesting truths about the world. So I really recommend reading it. And let me illustrate some of the radicalism, shall we say, or the fundamental orientation of the report just by quoting one passage from page 9 or thereabouts. It says the fundamental, not only geopolitical and geoeconomic, but also value and fully civilizational nature of the confrontation between Russia and the West means that the conflict will be long. Either Russia defends its right to free and safe development in a world freed from American and Western hegemony, or the United States and its allies will be able to eliminate Russia as an independent and unified country. So the report makes no bones about the profound stakes in the current conflict. Normalization of relations with most of the West, even in the medium term, is not only impossible, but also unbeneficial, as it will distract attention from restructuring the Russian economy and society in order to be able to live in an unstable world of acute conflicts in the next 15 to 20 years. And from reorienting the country towards new markets. Normalization, when it comes, must be carried out from the standpoint of one of the world majority's central powers. We proceed from the unambiguous assumption that the West's role and position in world geopolitics, geoeconomics, and ideology will decline in waves. The West is a powerful but historically retreating construct. So with us to discuss this report, its genesis, its arguments, its content, its importance, reception, influence, and impact, and more generally discuss Russia's foreign policy context and Russia's foreign policy in it, are a most distinguished panel of experts. It includes one of the report's 3 principal authors and another scholar who was part of the preparations that led to the report. I refer in the first case to Dimitri Trenin and in the second case to Anastasia Likhacheva, and Oleg Barabanov and Elena Maslova are also important scholars of international relations working in the top universities of Russia today. So what we'll have is each speaker will have about 13 to 15 minutes each to make their opening presentations, and then we will have some time for questions and answers thereafter. I propose to have Dimitri Trenin go first, followed by Elena Maslova, Oleg Barabanov, and then lastly, Anastasia Likhacheva. So let me introduce Dimitri Trenin. Dimitri Trenin is a member of the Russian Institute of, RIAC. I'm trying to remember what it is. Can someone help me, please? Okay, well, I'll just say he's a member of RIAC. He graduated from the Military Institute, now Military University in Moscow, and holds a PhD degree. He served in the Soviet and Russian armies and was a liaison officer in the external relations branch of the group of Soviet forces in Germany in Potsdam. He was senior lecturer at the Military Institute, member of the delegation at the Geneva talks on nuclear and space weapons, senior research fellow at the NATO Defense College, and fellow of the Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He was head of the Scientific Council, lead researcher, and chairman of the Foreign and Security Policy Program at the Carnegie Moscow Center. Since 2008, he was director of the Carnegie Moscow Center, and he is the author, which of course is no longer operating, but he is author of over 10 books published in Russia, the United States, Germany, China, and other countries. His academic focus was on transatlantic and Eurasian security, international relations, Russian foreign policy, geopolitics, and globalization and post-Soviet Eurasia. So Dimitri, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Well, Radhika, thank you very much. I believe the introduction is too long, too many ancient details. Anyway, I really thank you for having done a great job summarizing the report and some of its key findings. So it doesn't really allow me to discuss a lot of things that I originally planned to discuss. Maybe things will come up during the question and answer period. Let me provide a few fairly broad comments on your presentation. Let me regard your presentation as the first presentation of this webinar. Well, first of all, the world majority, as we discussed when you were in Moscow, at the Higher School of Economics annual conference, the term world majority, or the notion of world majority, is something that was born within the walls of the Higher School of Economics. We struggled a bit with how to define the countries that did not join the United States and its allies in the anti-Russian sanctions campaign, in the proxy war that's going on in Ukraine. And there were all sorts of suggestions, the global south, the global southeast, wider east, or something like that. The notion that won most of the votes, if you like, around the table was this notion of world majority, because this is not a geographical term. This refers to countries that refuse to submit to the hegemony of one power, to the notion that there's only one civilization in the world, and one true civilization in the world, and that's Western civilization. And all other civilizations need to be subsumed within a global Western, within some sort of a global West. So world majority refers to a lot of countries in Asia, a lot of countries in Africa, Latin America, but some countries, potentially some countries elsewhere, including in Europe, could join the world majority when they decide that their national sovereignty matters, that their national identity, their cultural, civilizational identity matters. So this is not a rival to the global south term. The global south is more of a socio-economic phenomenon. That's how it's being used, and there's nothing that we hold against that. But world majority is more political, and again, being very frank, this is the world seen from the vantage point of Moscow. This is something that we were working on a report that would be useful to Russian foreign policymakers. We were not doing some academic job. We were not proposing, some sort of a global term to be universally accepted. We had a very focused concept, and that's what we came up with. Let me underline what you I think, repeated a couple of times. I think this is very important. Let me add my own, plowing the same ground. Russia has experienced a revolution or is experiencing, because this is far from complete, a revolution in its foreign policy conceptualizing and its foreign policy making that we haven't seen in our lifetime. And actually, it's not just the last, let's say, 35 years or 40 years that is being revised and fundamentally rethought. This is something that changes a lot of perceptions with which Russian foreign policy operated since the days of Peter the Great. So we're talking about something really, really fundamental. You noted another key position that the report takes about the two worlds of Russian foreign policy as we define them. There's, if you like, the world of war and the world of peace and cooperation and partnership. We were not dealing with the former, and this is not, in our view, this is not where Russia's foreign policy will be most active, at least not where Russian diplomacy is going to be very active in the foreseeable future. This is the terrain that is being negotiated by the militaries on both sides, by other forces that are opposing each other in this proxy war between Russia and the West that has, unfortunately, a potential of becoming a real war. And I think that since the report was published, we've moved substantially closer to a real war between Russia and NATO than where we were, let's say, a year ago. You mentioned that we did not spend much time thinking about ways to normalize relations with the West. There's a very simple reason why that's the case. There's no norm at this point. We will not be going back to any of the former models of Russian-Western relations. These models are all, let's say, are all history, and new norms will have to be fought over, will have to be won, will have to be accepted as a result of this monumental struggle. Excuse my highfalutin rhetoric, that's going on between Russia and the West. It's truly existential for Russia. It's important for the West, not existential in my view, but still important. That norm needs to be forged in that struggle. But the report is focused on the positive side of Russian foreign policy, and there is a sad fact, that throughout its certainly throughout the post-Soviet period, and I would say even before that, Russia's foreign policy was so heavily focused, heavily concentrated on relations with the West, essentially Western Europe and North America. And it neglected the relations with countries of Asia and Latin America and the Middle East and Africa and others in the non-Western world. And this break in relations with the West that was initiated by Western countries, I should say, pushed Russia, which in my view did not really feel very happy about that initially, pushed Russia to face up to the opportunities that existed in the East, because all opportunities in the West were foreclosed as a result of the Western response to the Russian operation in Ukraine. But relations with the world majority are not primarily, and certainly not only, about compensating for the opportunities lost in the West. They are about building, again, high-sounding phrase, but building elements of a new world order. I think that Russian leaders and Russian elites, if I may use the term, let me put it differently, Russian foreign and security policy community has come to the conclusion that the current Western-dominated structure of the world could not be improved, that the West will not cede authority, power, will not be on equal terms with the rest of the world. The United States, for that matter, does not see, and I don't think it will see, any other country as its peer. It has the problem of not being able to treat other countries as equals. And that's a very big problem of U.S. foreign policy, which I think will be aggravated as time goes on and other countries become more powerful, because it's something that is in the genes, I would say, of certainly post-World War II U.S. foreign policy. But Russia, within the fora that you mentioned, whether it's BRICS or SCO or other fora, should start building elements of a new world order. Russia should not think, and this is what we're making very clear, they should not think that the world majority is potentially some sort of an anti-Western bloc. This is not even wishful thinking. This is total nonsense. All countries have their national interests. A lot of countries depend on the West. There are very few countries that would oppose the United States. Crossing path of the U.S. as a terrible price for countries to pay. Most countries would not think would not consider that as an option for them. But in parallel to the existing world order, there can be, and there are elements that would allow countries in the non-West, countries in the world majority group, to build the relations, let's say in the financial field and the field of international standards, the logistics and information system, what have you, price setting on certain commodities, that would be independent of the dominance of the United States and its international instruments. So those things, for Russia, this is a necessity. For other countries, this is a potential future necessity that's becoming more and more likely. So this is something that forms the perhaps the most important axis of Russia's foreign policy landscape directed at the world majority. I don't want to spend too much time, but let me finish on saying that this is, among other things, an attempt, I'm talking about this report, an attempt to win a portion of intellectual independence, intellectual identity, not simply using Western constructs and trying to refashion them for our needs. We're trying to create a new picture of the world in our heads and compare that to what others in the world majority group are coming up with, and certainly ideas in China and India and the Arab world and Iran, in many other countries. And that would help us, I think, build the elements of a new world order that would be appropriate for the emerging world built around several major civilizations and dozens of independent, autonomous, and above all, sovereign nations. So let me start here, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Dimitri. But before we go on to the next speaker, may I ask you to reflect a little bit on how the report's been received in the public, from the government, etc. If you have any thoughts to add on that, perhaps you might.
Well, it's interesting that the term that we coined at the Higher School of Economics was picked up not only by the people with whom we discussed the report, the foreign ministry people, but essentially by the national leaders. And President Putin has been using this notion of a world majority very frequently in the last few months. So it's become an accepted term in Russia, and this is very important because we were in the business of making intellectual frames for discussion, for policy making, for conceptualizing, and maybe this is the most important achievement so far of the report, that the notion of a world majority, that the ideas that were put into this report are being received by those who are charged with Russian foreign policy making, and essentially by the person who is entrusted with actually being responsible for Russia's foreign policy setting, and that's the president of the country. The fact that the report was posted on the website of the foreign ministry is another indicator of how it was received. Again, it was not penned by MFA officials. It was penned by a group of intellectuals who were acting as part of this task force. They discussed things with the MFA people, but essentially it is not a product of the MFA. It's a product of that group of Russian experts.
Great, that's really very helpful, and it sets the context very well. Thank you so much. We'll now go to our next speaker, Elena Maslova. Elena has a PhD in political science and is associate professor and senior researcher at GIMO University, which is, I believe, Russia's most influential university for diplomats and foreign policy experts. And she is senior researcher at the Institute of Europe at the Russian Academy of Sciences. So, Elena, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Dear Radhika, thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity. Today everyone is talking about the multipolarity of the world and the contours of a new world that are emerging. And so the report of Karaganov's team is the evidence of that. Meanwhile, such institutions as BRICS and SCO are becoming increasingly important in these contexts. But much has been said about the importance of BRICS and SCO for Russia, but it should be noted that both BRICS and SCO were already in the interest of Russia long before the 2022. So I will not recount the report. I hope you will take your time to read it and to reflect on it. Instead, I would like to talk a bit about the BRICS and about the uniqueness of the BRICS as a form of integration, as a sort of integration. So the uniqueness of the BRICS is, first of all, is that each member is also a leading economy in its continent or sub-region within a regional integration arrangement. So that is Russia in the Eurasian Economic Union, Brazil in Mercosur, South Africa in the South African Development Community, SADC, India in the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, and China in the Shanghai Organization for Cooperation, and also Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So all countries that are partners of the BRICS in these regional integration arrangements may form what may be termed as the BRICS Plus So if it is a format, or it can be described also as a circle that becomes open and flexible with multiple modes of cooperation, not exclusively via trade liberalization, but also bilateral and regional basis. And moreover, each of the regional integration groups has its own network of economic alliances with third countries. For instance, Eurasian Economic Union has a free trade area with Vietnam, while Mercosur concluded a FTA with Israel. And these countries and regional blocs that have concluded agreements with BRICS countries, regional blocs, may form the BRICS++ circle. So the development of the BRICS network into several circles of alliances not only extends integration opportunities, but also enhance their optionality, as each nation can differ inclusions within the network and make it more piecemeal and gradual. So in fact, the BRICS plus circle creates the internal regional partnership matrix for BRICS countries, consisting of important regional integrational blocks such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Mercosur, SAC, and so on. And the BRICS++ MBIT forms a looser circle of bilateral partnership based on FTA or other kinds of economic integration treaties. And both BRICS Plus and BRICS are expanding the set of partnerships for all nations covered by this broader cycle, whereby current trade or investment arrangement can form the foundation for multilateralizing such deals with our members of the enlarged community. And if the expanded BRICS network succeeds in constructing its financial weight, it can have an important effect on the world's economy, trade, and investment flows, and become a focal point for attracting these flows on a cumulative causation basis, as was the case with developed economies in previous decades. And the international system is defined by increasingly interdependent and asymmetrical relationships between various actors that make it up. And in the multipolar world, the BRICS groups has already its place and influence. And there is no doubt that BRICS group makes it mark not only in the economic landscape, but also political, and have gone a long way from being a simple acronym. And just to make a brief so-called SWOT analysis and to remind the major BRICS achievements so far, I would name them briefly as a keyword. So BRICS achievements are 3 areas of cooperation: politics, security, economy and finance, culture and humanitarian ties. It is a working platform for addressing global world issues and economic sectoral cooperation. It is a platform for finding solutions to global economic and political challenges. It has enhancing the role on the global south in the governance mechanism, various formats of cooperation, institutions such as New Development Bank, Contingent Currency Reserve Pool, Exchange Alliance, Interbank Cooperation Mechanism, Banking Forum, Business Council, Network University, Energy Association, BRICS Startup Forum, special platform for innovation and industrial revolution. What about weaknesses? We can name different economic potential of participants, economic competition between countries on different levels, political contradictions between individual countries or on individual issues, and internal political changes, factors that affect foreign policy political choices. Opportunities. Formation of an alternative payment system, expanding the use of national currencies in mutual settlements, BRICS-bound fund, formation of new logistics routes, deepening energy cooperation, including BRICS Energy Research Platform and BRICS Energy Cooperation Roadmap, and a single unit of account. And what about threats? It's difficulty in finding a balance of interests as the numbers of members countries and their heterogeneity increase, and the need to find new ways of decision making in the association, increasing complexity of management, loss of flexibility in responding to new global challenges. Thus, we see that nevertheless, threats and opportunities, issues, that such format like as BRICS that could be defined in some way, a format without a format, is clearly in demand among countries. It is attractive for the countries, and what is even more important, it is viable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. I think you are emphasizing, I think, a lot of the interesting and important details on which the report recommends action. And I think that's very critically important. So thanks very much for that. I feel, in fact, on reading the report and looking at the things you are emphasizing, that if all countries did that, we would sort of get to the new world order much quicker than we are at the moment. Okay, our next speaker is Professor Oleg Barabanov. Oleg is Program Director of the Valdai Discussion Club, coordinating, and he's coordinating professional programs of the Global Commons, Global Alternatives. He's also Academic Director of the European Studies Institute of GIMO University, which I mentioned earlier. He's Professor of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he is a Senior Research Fellow at the Russian Institute for Strategic Studies. He's co-author of various Valdai Club publications on the global right-wing and left-wing protest, on creating Greater Eurasia, on relations between Russia, China, and the US, and on nuclear fears following the Ukraine crisis. Oleg, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Radhika, for inviting me for the webinar. And let me thank Mr. Trenin and his co-authors of the report, because it's a really significant contribution of reconsidering Russian foreign policy now in the current geopolitical situation. Because I agree with Mr. Trenin that before the 24th of February, the Russian foreign policy strategy, the Russian foreign policy thinking was many Western-centric, and sure that Vladimir Putin posed himself as a kind of l'enfant terrible of the West, but still both the official line and the intellectual thinking around it was focused that we are still part of the West, we are still don't want to break with the West, and so on. And that is also true that maybe starting from the Vladimir Putin's speech at the Munich conference, it was in 2007 or 2008, something like this, that Russia started to refocus its policy from the West to other parts of the world, but still the West, the European Union, the United States were the real number one. And for example, Russian activity in other parts of the world, like Southeast Asia, like Africa, like Latin America, was very marginal, I would say, at best. And exactly because of the radical change of situation, it was necessary to provide not a new version of foreign policy strategy, but at least to reflect on it. And I see now for these 2 years a quite active movement within the Russian intellectual community, how to reflect on it, how to rethink the current and the possible future situation, and how to pose the place in Russia, for Russia in the world. And that's also important because, sure, maybe I'm wrong, but for the vast majority of the Russian foreign policy intellectuals, it was also a shock, the events of 24 February. And I'd like to say that maybe I already told it at your previous webinar, but just to repeat it, that a couple of weeks before the start of the war, about 10 quite influential intellectuals on foreign policy, including me, I'm not consider myself influential, but at least all others were. We organized the kind of thought, and everybody was asked to provide a quite symbolic bet for peace or for war. And everybody, every 10 persons, had made their bet for peace. So nobody expected the events that happened 2 weeks after. And after that shock, sure, it was quite difficult for majority of the people to reformulate their position, to rethink it absolutely 180 grades from their previous views. Sure, I expect that everybody in our foreign policy community is sincere person, and he or she trusted in what he or she wrote, have written before the 24th February, and then changed his or her position. But now we are in the process of rethinking the situation. There are I repeat, quite active movement. There are several reports, several articles, and Mr. Trenin's report is one of the most important and one of the most influential within Russia. That's absolutely true. And focusing on this topic of new world majority, or simply the world majority, it's interesting to see and to analyze what were the relations between Russia and other non-Western countries. Because we remember, if we'll see the first months after the start of the war, 2 years ago, the reaction of many non-Western countries was quite cautious, including China. And the Chinese reaction was just, we'll see what will happen. One of our Chinese colleagues has written quite openly an article for us that in China, many people were absolutely surprised that Russia couldn't won Ukraine in a couple of weeks. And when it was not happen, then everybody became more cautious than at the beginning. But the situation has started to change after the US pressing on Taiwan. Remember the visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. And that exactly, for me, maybe I'm wrong, it has changed the Chinese position. Because Russia, just from the beginning, repeated to China, look, we are the first, but you will be the second. We are the first, but you will be the second. In sanctions, in everything, and join us in our difficult situation. The Chinese were restrained for half a year, but then after the Taiwan pressing of the United States, they decided that it could be true, that they really could be the second target. And they changed step by step their position to more active support for Russia. And for me, it was just not a clever thing for the U.S. State Department just to provoke the Chinese, because if you have two enemies, it's better to fight them separately, but not united. But that happened, and after that, everybody also started to rethink their positions, and we'll see that many other countries also not joined Russia totally, maybe except Belarus, Iran, and North Korea. We cannot name any country that are totally pro-Russian in this situation, but they became more accepting for Russian arguments. And that is exactly the BRICS case, what Elena Maslova just has mentioned, because it was quite surprising that immediately after the 24th February, there were many new applications to join the BRICS, because the BRICS as a club, the structure of 5 non-Western countries, existed for already 15 years. Sure, there were talks, maybe we enlarge, maybe we invite somebody else, but there were some just marginal talks. And but after the start of the war, surprisingly, many countries in various parts of the world decided to send their applications to the BRICS, because maybe exactly this radical change of situation was a reason for them to not to be united, because the BRICS is not like NATO, is not a military bloc with discipline and so on. And if we see on the votes of the BRICS members, the old BRICS members and new BRICS members, for example, in the General Assembly of the United Nations, on anti-Russian resolutions or anti-Iranian resolutions, we see that there is no one vote within the BRICS, and many BRICS countries vote differently. But this reason to be united, at least symbolically, in a kind of non-Western structure became really important for those countries. And in that sense, that idea of world majority could become real, because we see the interest of those countries to join the club and to cooperate together. Another point was about values. Because just from the beginning, Russia and the West as well, both parts of that great geopolitical conflict, focused on the values cleavage, the values divide between the West and Russia. I've seen in the chart what are your values except sovereignty. It's a good question and quite a difficult question to answer, because from the beginning it was a joke, but it was only a half joke, that our only real value is that we are against all your values. And this negativist approach was also, it united. Because if you came in China and say, we are against the Western values, if you come to Africa and say that we are against the Western values connected to colonialism and so on, everybody understands you. And everybody is accepted your point. But what about our positive values? The first one, and Vladimir Putin focused on it many times, is exactly on sovereignty. And we have a long way on reflecting on sovereignty in the official pro-Kremlin Russian political expertise. It was started with the notion of a sovereign democracy, that it was promoted about 20 years ago, that every country has the right for its own meaning, understanding of democracy, and the so-called Western receipts for democracy are not working in other countries. The next point is a sovereign historical memory, a sovereign understanding of history. Because we all see, at least in Russia, that Vladimir Putin has a real taste for history, and many of his speeches are focused on history for many minutes. And that sovereign meaning of history, the sovereign means in that sense that our understanding of history is not the same as it was and is in the Western manuals of history, something like this. And that was the second point. And the third point is also quite strongly growing within Russia now, within the official circles in Russia, is the focus on traditional values in social affairs, traditional values in family affairs, and so on. And this package is presented by Russia to other countries, by Russian officials to their counterparts in the non-Western countries, and it somehow works, because everybody, or almost everybody, think that could be done for them. And maybe my last point in this presentation is also connected to the values. It's maybe the last point of Vladimir Putin on the topic, that about several months ago, he has presented the idea of a state civilization. And he said that Russia is unique in history, in its sovereign history, in its sovereign culture, sovereign traditional values, and so on and so on. And in that sense, we are the civilization by ourselves. And this point, the state civilizations, was included also in the official Russian foreign policy strategy. It's a conceptual document written by our foreign ministry. Its last version was presented in the spring of 2023, so a year ago. And also Russia has started to propose, to promote that idea of a state civilization to other countries. And mainly there was a focus on maybe the Chinese could be interested to accept that idea, maybe India could be interested to accept that idea. But for me, maybe I'm wrong, that if Russia wants not only explain its official position by this notion, by this value of a state civilization, that just showing that Russia is a unique thing in the world and could not be repeated and reproduced by any other country. But if we could promote as the idea of a state civilizations to sell it, if you want, to others, so what would be the logic for them? If it's only for bigger countries like China or India, it also could be a dividing line within already non-Western countries. that there are big countries, there are state civilizations by themselves, and there are smaller countries that could join or should join or must join the bigger state civilization. To join first culturally and maybe later politically as well. So it just similar to Samuel Huntington's ideas of the clash of civilizations several decades ago. But the logic could be if every state, every country has the right to name itself as a state civilization. It could be a big country or a small country. For example, is Cameroon a state civilization? Is Bangladesh a state civilization? Is Mauritius a state civilization? If no, that is just a play for big countries. But if yes, it could be useful for them in promoting that sovereign understanding of everything, which is Russia, official Russia, is proposing now. But let's see, for the moment, the discourse on a state civilization is mainly for domestic use, as I see it. But if it could be promoted abroad, so we could also reflect on it. And sure, also we have to say another point, and my really last point is that before 24 February, Russia, being l'enfant terrible of the West, but still within the West, was quite suspicious and cautious to promote its relations with so-called rock countries and so on, like North Korea, like Iran and others. And now this has changed also. We'll see that the so-called rock countries, I use this George Bush Jr. term, excuse me for this, is the only real friends in Russia in the current situation. And if we consider this notion of a state civilization, of this focus on sovereignty in everything, sovereignty means we can do whatever we want. That's for so-called a club of dictators. It's maybe already Joe Biden's term. It could work better if we can some African or Asian or Latin America, it's not important, president which is considered a dictator by the West, that to show for him that, look, this is a good theory for you, this is a good ideology for you, this is a good set of values for you, for use both domestically and internationally. If you can understand them, accept them, and disseminate them. For more democratic countries in the Western sense of the word, maybe that logic with accent of state civilization, the uniqueness of a civilization, the sovereignty, maybe could not work well. But they also understand that notion of world majority, that notion of real cleavage between the West and the non-West that Russia has provoked on 24 February. And we'll see, just, I repeat, with the idea of enlarging of the BRICS. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oleg. I think you expressed many things really well, and put the report in the larger context of the rethinking on Russian foreign policy. And I thought particularly you expressed Russia's sense of isolation very keenly. So thanks very much. And we now move to our last speaker, Anastasia Likhacheva. Anastasia has a PhD in political science and is an associate professor and senior researcher also at GIMO University. She's also senior researcher at the Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy of Social Sciences and dean of the Faculty
Hello,
of World
Radhika.
Economy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think I have
Yes.
some.
Sorry, Anastasia.
Yes, can you hear me properly? I have some lags with connection.
Right, I can hear you properly. And I will just say that you are Dean of Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs and leading research fellow at the at that same faculty. And you teach at the Higher School of Economics, which is one of the institutions sponsoring this report. So please go ahead, Anastasia. I think we can hear you well.
Yeah, now it's fine, right?
Yes.
Well, actually, I'm very glad for an opportunity, Radhika, to participate in this discussion. Actually, it was almost postponed because of my planned business trip to World Majority, one of World Majority score in Africa, but maybe next time. So I'm very glad that I have a chance to join tonight, and I'm very grateful to my colleagues who have presented before. So I think my presentation will be a bit shorter. Because many issues already were covered, and I see many very interesting questions in chat because I'm.
Okay, you just frozen up, Anastasia. So maybe you want to reconnect. Yeah, I think that's what she's doing. We'll just give her a couple of minutes.
I'm sorry, is it fine now?
Yes.
Well, I don't know. It was so perfect all seminar before I had to present. So I would like to focus on a few things partially covered by my colleagues. First, well, I truly like the term of world majority, but I think it's important to precise why and how we differ it from global south, because normally global south is much more popular. So here I would start with the bit seditious thought that particularly to Russian foreign policy and to global south countries too, in fact, the term global south now in 2024 is harmful. First of all, for Russia, this concept is harmful primarily because Russia, in this case, acts as a foreign body, some other external partner that is different from the West, of course, but basically has to bargain with Global South on more or less same conditions. And Global South, in this case, represents some kind of bride that can choose which fiance is nicer, bargaining with all of them. At the same time, Russia obviously cannot be an integral part of the South, neither at the level of some basic meanings, because basically we are a northern power with the largest Arctic frontier of the world, but also, of course, from the point of view of political, military, technological, or social development. And it's not about particularly just the Russian case. If we speak about China, for example, China also is no longer the first among equals. And the format of cooperation with Group 77 plus one, plus China, is a clear confirmation of this. In addition, we see some growing difficulties and tensions between China and India positions itself as flagship of the Global South, the ambassador of Global South, so it also doesn't contribute to some convergence. But it's some kind of political rhetoric exercises. From a factual point of view, the term no longer reflects reality. If in 1969, when it was appeared, the Global South, all major balances were completely different: demographic, economic, research, capacity balance, the balance of potentials. It was very clear why there is the West and Global South is the part of the world that clearly cannot challenge the West in vice versa contradiction. So now we see a different situation. First, in terms of transfer of development technologies, not only G7 or OECD countries. Nuclear weapons are not only in the West. Economic power, well, if we forget all the political rhetorics and disinformation and take a look on the statistics, in top 5 economies of the world, according to PPP, of course, USA and Japan represent the West, but 3 of them, like China, India, and Russia, clearly are from another league. And also, if we think about the future, if countries of the global West, of the global South focus on this concept, it's also harmful because basically it predetermines reliance on external partner. Because nowadays the South doesn't have enough resources and technologies to reach a completely self-sufficient development trajectory without some external impulse. And the nature of this impulse is the question, like more or less favorable terms, more capitalist or less capitalist in the model of the 20th century, new colonization, or some creative partnership that China tries to promote. It's not so important. Still, these countries must rely on the other, on the important other. And the main thing here is lack of independence. So we can speak about some complete subjectivity in this case. The idea that now global South is kind of buyer's market for aid and development also doesn't work. We have an example of climate fund that was promised to be collected $100 billion since 2010 formally. Well, it's still zero in this fund. Well, not zero, I'm sorry, a couple of $1 billion that were assigned but didn't spend yet. So when there is no clear strategy for profit gaining for Western countries, they don't really go in some aid and development strategies to global South. So I see that both for Russia, for global South countries, some new integral format that global majority or world majority represent really fits to their genuine and long-term interests. But here is a pretty logic question on which basis, on which structures this integral format can be based. I'm very grateful to Elena, who already presented some SWOT analysis of major new formats like BRICS and SCO. I have just a couple of ideas to add here. First, when we speak about new institutions for global majority, for Russian foreign strategy, we non-intentionally copied the logic of institutions elaborated in since the second part of the 20th century. I don't believe that just copying of previous structures like World Bank for world majority, like New Development Bank of BRICS basically, can work in the same way. It won't, because what is bad for their major investors, the Western countries, that format used to work very well. Were very efficient. They managed to recruit perfectly educated experts and staff. And the idea that we make all the same, but just in other cities, not in New York, but in Shanghai, it's not enough. I think that these new institutions, if they truly can represent the new spirit of international partnership, more sovereign, more independent, they must be of different nature. First, I see it as more ad hoc or network-based formats. And here there are plenty of opportunities based on the very genuine demand for new, less controlled, less monopolized systems for international interactions, not necessarily cooperation, just interaction from networks. Communication networks, also insurance, finance, technology transfer networks, technology standard networks. It's all needed. It can be based within BRICS, of course, within SCO, but also it can be very ad hoc initiatives like triangles. For example, Russia, United Emirates, Ethiopia in terms of digital food security, or Russia, Iran, India in terms of new transport insurance and the insurance for logistics, if we really want to make new north-south corridor. So these ad hoc, more flexible institutions, they have bigger chance to succeed, to be successful. Also, because the whole logic of institutionalism of the 20th century, that countries deserve gradually, but deserve more and more to delegate, to transfer from less important to very important functions to supranational level, it completely fails and ruined nowadays. Countries don't want to transfer and delegate anything. They want to take their powers back or find someone who will pay for this transfer in the best case scenario. So, for example, in the green agenda strategy, what India, what other global south countries want, they tell, give us money and we'll define on our own how to spend them. It doesn't work by very obvious reasons. But for institutions, it's also won't work. So I think the whole new institutionalism for global majority based on the idea of intense supranational component will fail. So it's the design of these structures must be completely different, and I see some impulses that Russian officials understand it. That's why, for example, our Ministry of Foreign I'm lost. Our foreign ministry, they are very careful, our Ministry of Finance, they're very careful in establishing new international organizations within BRICS officially. We have bank, we have network cooperation in anti-monopoly law, some network universities that work more or less successfully, unfortunately more or less successfully, but still. There is understanding that just copying the previous formats won't work. Also, the last but not the least, we still have old institutions, and next year we'll celebrate 80 years of United Nations. And of course, the long-lasting debate on the reform of United Nations will take place. I'm very skeptical about some significant shifts in the design of Security Council. Lots of talks will be there, lots of bargains, but, well, I don't believe that it can be profoundly shifted. No, if we don't speak about some symbolic democratization of UN, like now, Security Council must present to General Assembly what they did and why they did so. But there is one issue that can be of some impetus for this global majority cooperation. If United Nations still represent itself as some global savior or global emergency assistant, it must move physically move closer to global problems. By now, except Nairobi and lucky Kenyans, no UN agency, I don't speak about regional agencies, but program headquarters or agencies, all of them are placed in the Western countries. It has a very clear and profound message. If world majority, Russia and China also being UN security members, don't have any UN agency or program based on their territories, it means that if global majority countries have any problem, they must visit normal countries to address their problems. I honestly love most of the cities they choose, like Paris or Vienna or Turin or New York or Geneva. But it's ridiculous now when we see the concentration of international problems, of global problems in the countries with 5 to 6 to 7 billion people living there. So I think that this a bit populist idea from the start about physical restructuring of UN representation, it can really gradually shift the whole focus of the activity of this institution. But it's long-term and intense work. I would stop here and very grateful for the opportunity to talk. Thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Anastasia. Again, very informative, and thank you. So we are now at the end of our formal presentations, and we will be taking some questions. If people have any questions, I'll give you if you have questions, please raise your hand. You can use the raise hand function. It would be best if you use the raise hand function in the Zoom. So you will find it under, let me see, reactions. There is a raise hand function. So and also maybe while people are thinking about questions, did anybody want to react to the other people's presentations among the panelists? Do anybody want to add any points that you thought of later? Okay, let me go to the first couple of questions, and I also have a question to add. So I will go to Raphael, and then I think you say Grakian, but yeah, I hope I've not murdered your name very much, but please go ahead, Raphael. Raphael, please unmute yourself and pose your question. Okay, if not, I will go to Grakian. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Yes, I have a question to the Professor Trenin. Do you hear me?
I'm sure he can hear you. Please pose your question.
Okay, I didn't analyze the report yet, but I have analyzed the two parts of article which was published by Professor Karaganov in Russian Global Politics, and I know he is also connected with Professor Trenin, and in those two articles, which is called about the war in our times or something like that, the war in 21st century or something like that, is very two-part article. I put these links in our chat, but I have a question because there are very much of interesting ideas, but the main which I want to ask you is that Professor Karaganov highlight the possibility that Russia in this in this ongoing new wave of struggle against the West should start in the previous attack, not in aimed at the state, but at the global oligarchy. He highlighted that the possibility that the first strike should be against this global oligarchy, which are control this transnational agenda and imperialism. How do you react to this proposition?
Thank you very much. And if I just, you're very good, but I just would like to remind people to be as brief as Grakian has been. I have Jim. Please go ahead, Jim, and then I will read a question from Ian. So please go ahead, Jim.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I look forward to reading the paper. Several quick questions. First of all, how does the panel see the domestic situation in the United States interrelating to their wider discussion of the shifts of international affairs? Obviously, we could have a lengthy debate for hours on that, but I know we don't have time for that. Secondly, how much of this paper, I read very carefully. I've been following very carefully the events in the Ukraine for several years now. And how much of what you're asserting is essentially a practical response of Russian foreign policy to the situation that they were left with at the time of the invasion of Ukraine? That is, that this is a response to essentially defeat the sanctions regimes that were imposed on them. And there's not much difference from what you guys are arguing from what I read in that essay that Putin wrote. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Okay, so we'll have one more question, and then I will go to a round of answers, and then we will do a second round if there are any there are already some further questions, so we'll do a second round. So Ian asks, what are the prospects for communism and the Communist Party in Russia, and how does that interact with the discussion here? CP successor parties have returned to power as the center-left of the multi-party spectrum in parts of the old Eastern Bloc, including under the name of CP in post-Soviet Moldova for a time, and in Russia might well have won the election in 1996 that Yeltsin allegedly had rigged. Of course, still the CPRF is the main opposition party as opposed to pro-Western liberals or for that matter, ultra-nationalists. Presumably this realignment of foreign policy is something they'd support. Perhaps they'd be even more comfortable with than Putin and his government themselves. Is there a chance that they may come to power at some point? I think I'll leave it at that. I think that's the question. So those are the questions. I think, Dimitri, perhaps you want to start since one of the questions was directed at you. I will just go in the same order as the speakers spoke. So please go ahead, Dimitri.
Well, thank you, Radhika. I feel uncomfortable discussing questions that are actually posed to something that my friend and colleague Sergei Karaganov wrote. But let me give you an answer from my perspective on the issue, not so much on what Sergei wrote. I mentioned in my initial remarks that the Ukraine conflict has deteriorated since 2022. And the escalation strategy that the United States has been pursuing is essentially bringing us closer and closer to a direct and kinetic collision, head-on collision between Russian and NATO armed forces. Now, if one has to consider that as a possibility. Should that come to pass, I think we will quickly find ourselves in what people used to call for decades a third world war, a large-scale war between NATO and Russia would certainly have a nuclear element, which will become the dominant element very fast. And I think it will end in essentially obliterating much of the Northern Hemisphere. So I think we're dealing with a very serious issue here. Now, my own view is that part of the problem is the deficiencies in Russia's strategic deterrence of the United States. Essentially, Russia's nuclear arsenal is no longer feared and no longer taken as a deterrent. And that, I think, is a very dangerous novelty compared to the Cold War. So in my view, rather than incrementally move closer and closer to the abyss, and essentially find oneself at the bottom of that abyss, one has to put nuclear deterrent front and center. And essentially tell people in no uncertain terms and do certain things that will convince people that the nuclear option is very much an instrument, a working instrument that Russia might use. And I think that we need to think about nuclear today the way we actually thought about nuclear toward the end of the Cold War, as something that kept the Cold War cold. And in my view, unless we put nuclear deterrent front and center and demonstrate resolve in using nuclear under certain circumstances, we might find ourselves in something that no one is seriously thinking about in the West. So this is my own view. With regard to the global oligarchy, as you put it, I think the people who are driving policies need to be brought out of comfort zones. A lot of these people have made decisions already that have endangered human life on this planet. Again, forgive me for using highfalutin phrases, but these people need to be persuaded that they will not ride out this storm, that storm will obliterate them as well as many others. Maybe in the first instance them, before innocents pay the price for their policies. And very briefly, with regard to the domestic situation in the United States, no one can predict what happens at the election. No one can predict what happens after the election. I think it would be safe for a country like Russia not to entertain hopes of any kind. I don't think that, and I mentioned that, normalization of US-Russian relations, in my view, is not years, but rather decades away. The norm is not there. The norm will have to take a lot of our labor to install and to establish itself. But I think people need to be very careful. The situation is, I think, more likely to become worse than better, whoever wins the election. And one has to be, again, I refer you to my response to the first question. Is the world majority thing a practical response to a specific situation? Yes, this is how major things happen. First, you adapt to something that you cannot ignore. But the foreign policy concept is actually, about a year old, and there's been a lot of water under the bridge. 2 years ago, Putin was still seeking some sort of a Minsk III agreement with Ukraine. Some sort of a compromise was thought possible, and for some people even desirable. No longer. I think that the realization of the past year, particularly of the past year, is that the conflict between Russia and the West is not just about security, is not just about Ukraine. It is very deep, it is fundamental, and that conflict will take a long time to resolve itself. So yes, what started as a practical response, if you like, has evolved into a fundamentally new thinking, a fundamentally new departure in Russian foreign policy. As I said, putting an end, closing books on Peter the Great's opening to Europe. We're very, very far from that now. And I will not talk about the prospects for the Communist Party in Russia. I do not see much of a prospect, except, they will, I don't know whether they will come second or the candidate or third in the election, but they were given like 6% of the vote before the election started. We'll see what the final result will be. It's a good thing that they are there. It's a good thing that they participate constructively in the work of the Duma. It's a good thing that the Communist Party is a patriotic organization in Russia, but I don't think it has, in its present form, it has much of a political future. Thank you.
Thanks, Dimitri. Elena, would you like to add anything or respond in any way to these questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Oleg, please go ahead if you, I'm sure you would like to say something.
I'll pick up the question on communism, as you can understand. Yes, and first of all, it's a very good and a very important question, and we already dedicated several webinars here at the International Manifesto group on the Russian left. And I think everybody could find our discussions on the topic just in the previous period before the start of the war. But for the moment, I agree with Dimitri Trenin about the perspective of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. But let me transform that question into more general one. How we can see Russia now? Because now Russia is fighting against the West. Russia is at the real physical front line with the West. And it poses a question and the challenge to the international left, how to react on it. Because the first thing that the international left and as far as I see the International Manifesto Group as well, because I attend your webinars for several years already, are the people who dedicated all their lives to the fight against the Western imperialists. That's true. And is Russia alive for you now or no? That is quite a difficult question, and we see the division among the international left on their reactions on Russia now. The majority are anti-Russian, but there are some people who are pro-Russian, considering Russia now as maybe no more than a tactical ally, but still an ally in the aim of fighting the American imperialism. But the point is whether we consider contemporary Russia as an anti-imperialist country. I've written a good point from our chat, world majority vis-a-vis imperialism. What does it mean? World majority vis-a-vis monopoly capitalism, it was written there. And it's exactly a good point, because Russia is definitely, the official Russia, I mean the Kremlin, is definitely a right-wing thing. That's why some people here hopes for the victory of Donald Trump. That's why we have among our friends, I mean official friends, some ultra-right-wing parties in the West. And we already discussed it. That is quite difficult and unnatural, I would think, for official Russia to cooperate with the left now, because the language, the ideas are totally different. And that is the point that we should also keep in mind, from my point of view. And I remember many people were shocked here that, sorry for the long answer, I'm just finishing. Many people were shocked here when once Vladimir Putin said, but look at the Ukrainians, what they are doing. They are destructing the monuments to Lenin. But that's okay, forget about Lenin. I'm quoting Putin. But what they are doing instead, they are putting the monuments on Nazis and neo-Nazis instead the monument of Lenin. And maybe I'm wrong, but his personal position is clearly and openly anti-communist and anti-Leninist particularly. Because with these monuments to Lenin in Ukraine, they remained from the Soviet time, where the monument to Lenin was in every town or village of the Soviet Union, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic included. This destruction of the monument was a kind of symbolic revolt, not against the Soviet Union, but against Russia. And being pro-Russian for many people there became being pro-Lenin in that sense. And when Putin said that, but just forget about Lenin, you could destroy the monuments to him, just not to put neo-Nazis in his place, was a shock for many in my country.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Oleg. And finally, Anastasia, would you like to add anything on these questions?
Well, actually, if I can saying a few words, I see also a very interesting question from the chat on indigenous people. I think that here we see very interesting dichotomy, because what we see from Russian perspective, that many like Western-based associations of indigenous people who have, like, for example, headquarters, especially if we speak about indigenous who live both in Russia and in the United States, whose headquarters are situated in New York, for example. They clearly are very inspired by US Track 2 story to develop many initiatives and projects in the Russian Arctic. They don't really succeed in this, and we know that really lots of efforts is performed to find some balance between Russian Arctic development and indigenous interests, because just Russian Arctic development is the very natural part of the whole logic of Arctic development. In our country, it's like almost 70% of the territory that formally is included in Arctic region. So here it's tricky. If we speak about the logic of the support of people who suffer from hypocritic capitalism, I can see some clear strategy here, honestly. If we speak about the logic of building dialogues between, for example, Russian indigenous community and best practices of Russian indigenous people with, for example, Brazilian indigenous in Amazonia, and this kind of dialogue, we see that interest and some practical exchange networks. So not mostly Arctic now, but indigenous.
Great. Thank you so much, Anastasia. Okay, so we will have, I think there are only 2 questions now remaining in the final round of questions. So I will ask Alan to ask his question, and then I would like to add one of my own. We'll have a round of answers, and then we will wrap up. So Alan, please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask 3 questions that may sound unrelated, but I think they're related. One is, what impact do you think China is having on Russian foreign policy? The second question is, what impact do you think the resistance in Gaza is having on Russian foreign policy? That's a strange thing to say, but there is a fundamental issue. And the third question is, my real question, when I studied Putin's recent speech to the nation, what struck me, there was an element in it which was not widely commented on in the West, which was the stress on social reform. Now, I know that there are many people I know who are socialists in Russia. By the way, I'll be here in the first week of April, and I hope to meet many of you and discuss this, who are very cynical whenever there is an announcement from Putin that there will be social reform. But I wish to suggest there is such a thing as social and military necessity. Nobody expected that the Russian economy would recover to the extent that it has, and I don't want to exaggerate, but I think the imperative of turning the economy towards fighting a war has a big transformational effect. And I spoke on a panel at the Valdai Club with people who are involved in the military industries, and they confirm what I believe, which was that it is essentially the military operation is planned. And once you start planning, you can forget what you want to say about, neoliberalism. You just do it because it's necessary. But there's a second thing that's necessary, is to overcome inequality in the country. You have to win a war, you have to unite the nation, above all, if you're not an imperialist nation. If you're an imperialist nation, you use racism to win your case. But if you are not an imperialist nation, you have to unite all parts of the population. And this, to me, is the message of the civilizational state, is we will not allow national and ethnic divisions and religious divisions to divide us. But now there's a deeper question, which is, will we allow economic differences to divide Russia? Now, I'm not saying Putin or his advisors have been particularly sensitive to this issue in practice in the past, but I wonder if it's actually almost a necessity from the point of view of achieving the standing in the world economy and in the theater of war that Russia needs. And the connection with China is very simple. There was a moment in Chinese history about 4 or 5 years ago when they realized that, and they embarked on the Common Prosperity Program, now the Modernization Program, to project a world in which there would be an equality of peoples demonstrated by the way that their own society was organized. Now, maybe that's very optimistic, but I wonder if necessity is perhaps having an influence on the policymakers in Russia in this respect.
Great, thanks, Alan. And I'll also quickly add my own question, and then we'll go to some replies. So my question really it's connected in some ways to the discussion that was just had about nuclear weapons and so on. But it's not really about nuclear weapons, because the thing is, the whole issue, what prompted, as Dimitri pointed out, what prompted Professor Karaganov, it seems, to make his arguments, his quite provocative arguments, was that it seems as though the United States has lost all fear of the Russian nuclear arsenal. And so the idea is that you preserve peace by instilling this fear in the United Nations, in the United States once again. But what if the United States has not become less fearful, but something else is going on? And I think I want to suggest that it's possible that something else is going on, which is that the United States, I think Dimitri also said, and the report says, by the way, that the United States seems to be practically congenitally unable to change course, that it is going to continue to try to impose its neoliberal capitalist demands on the rest of the world and demand that everybody conform to them and so on, this universalization of neoliberalism that the US is committed to. And I find that interesting because I've often said the same thing since actually the late 90s, when I first used the term in a speech I was giving. I said that the United States had, or maybe it was the early 2000s, the United States has no plan B. It has only plan A, which is to impose its domination on the world and to compel everyone, every country in the world to submit to its neoliberal dictates. And because the United States is not succeeding in this very well, it is taking ever greater risks to try to achieve what is ultimately an unachievable goal. Now, I tend to think of this in terms of imperialism. That is to say, I explain this by saying that early in the 20th century, the United States elites, ruling circles could see that British power was waning, and they hoped to replace British power with American power. And they have since that time been engaged in the same perspective. Now, you don't use the term imperialism. So how do you explain the fact that the United States finds it so hard to change course and cannot be expected to change course very easily? And probably nothing short of revolution will compel the United States to change course. So if you could please all comment as you like on this, that would be great. So once again, I'll go in the same order as before. Dimitri, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Radhika. China's impact on Russia's foreign policy. I don't think that there's a direct impact. China is a very important partner, very close strategic partner, but it's not like Russia's boss, as a lot of the Western mainstream media try to make it without citing any evidence to support that thesis. So it's important to have China at your side. I think this is a major and positive change for Moscow compared to the Cold War situation, when the Soviet Union confronted both the West and China, and was quite in a bind, geopolitically, economically, strategically speaking. So China's impact is positive because it is a close partner, a country that can defy a lot of Western sanctions, not all, but it's certainly not Russia's overlord by any definition. There's more reliance on China economically and in part technologically, fine, but this does not translate into political subservience. So American ideas about reaching out to China so that China can influence Russia's behavior are, in my view, totally nonsensical on both counts. China understands that the United States wants to use it against the only major country in the world that is a China's strategic partner. If you look at China, for China, Russia is the only country that can materially help China withstand U.S. or U.S.-led pressure. And secondly, it is nonsensical because China does not have the leverage with Russia that the United States wants to credit Beijing with. Resistance in Gaza, I think it is seen as it is the whole conflict in Gaza is seen as evidence of the waning power of the United States to regulate situations in important regions of the world. So the United States, in a way, lost control of what was of the situation between Israel and Gaza and Hamas in Gaza, and now it's trying to stabilize the situation in its favor and finds it very difficult. So I think it is seen largely in terms of the waning influence and waning capabilities of the United States to control formerly one of the most important regions of the world for the United States. It's interesting what this portends for America's future policies and standing in Europe. Let's say in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, of the Ukraine war, and particularly in case, which I think is something that is very likely to happen in case of a Russian strategic success, or call it victory, in Ukraine, and how the United States will deal with that is very interesting, and what it will also mean for the general view of the administration on the United States on America with regard to America's standing in the world. I will not address the question about social reform. There are others on this panel who are better qualified to talk about that. I will just comment on Radhika's last question. I think that the problem for the United States is that there are two things competing in U.S. Foreign policy making: what to prioritize, the national interest of the United States or the interest of the American empire. I think we saw that in a very different form in the final years of the Soviet Union, the final decade and a half of the Soviet Union. And I think that the United States, in some way and form, may face a similar dilemma. It's not something that is inextricably linked to Trump, the nationalist, versus Biden, the globalist. But this nationalism, U.S. nationalism versus U.S. globalism, are bound to clash at some point. And a big country like the United States will not change its foreign policy as a result of some sort of a foreign adventure or misadventure, but it will as a result of some major shifts happening at home. So I'm not predicting that the United States will follow in the footsteps of the Soviet Union, but the two developments, one that's already a fact, and the other one that is still in the making, may rhyme to a certain degree. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Elena, would you like to respond to any of the questions? I don't see Elena here. Okay, let me just go on then to Oleg. Oleg, please go ahead.
Yeah, yes, to Alan's point on economic situation in Russia, yes, it was quite a surprise that the Russian economy, at least for the moment, are doing well under sanctions, under war expenditures, and so on. But maybe, if you allow me just Marxist explication to it, they started for the first time in 30 years to spend money for real industry. Not because all the financial policy of Russia, of post-Soviet Russia for 30 years was 100% neoliberal. And there were no cheap credit for industries, there were no cheap credit for agriculture. So it was quite difficult or absolutely impossible to develop industrial projects. Now the government started to give a quite big amount of money to real industries. Sure, firstly and mainly to the military industrial sector, but nevertheless, we'll see the industrial development going on. We'll see the money in the industrial sector. There is a kind of spillover between the military factories and civil factories. And in that sense, that could be the reason of that quite good situation with our economy now. And how sustainable, how long it will be, sure, it depends of many factors. I've seen a good phrase in our chat now that it was written that the corruption within the Russian state is a much more dangerous enemy for Russian development than the US military operation. I totally agree with it. And in all corruption rankings, Russia was among the worst. And when we are talking, and one of the questions previously was about the global oligarchy. Well, the Russian oligarchy is a part of a global oligarchy. Yeah, at least they wanted to be a part of it. They pretended to be a part of it, and they are still trying to do somehow to restore their position. So the question is, there is one point that any war, it's cynically speaking, but any war at the beginning give a stimulus for economic development, because the state starts to invest into industries, to invest into industrial production. But it could stop by two reasons. One reason is if the war became long and long and long and long, and there are no more financial resources within the state to invest. And the second point is just corruption. So let's hope. I'm a pessimistic, you know quite well, Alan, my position. I'm a pessimist on it, but let's hope.
Thank you so much, Oleg. Anastasia, any final thoughts, comments, etc.?
No, I just see that in chat there are several issues on sanctions, and I will be eager to discuss in the future this sanction paradox. We work a lot on it. It's pretty interesting.
Okay. Well, I was actually typing this comment, but since we are nearly done, I'll just say it. One of the things I find really interesting about the sanctions regime is when you go to Russia, you actually still see a lot of Western companies that are still operating in Russia. It's amazing, but they are there. So anyway, I mean, there are many holes in the sanctions regime. There's a lot of hypocrisy in the sanctions regime. There's a lot of grandstanding in the sanctions regime, but still, they have indeed also backfired, and that's really something to investigate. But that's perhaps a topic for another seminar, which I think maybe with Anastasia's help we will organize. And so thank you very much, first of all, to the audience. Thank you to all the speakers for taking the time to discuss this really important subject and offering your thoughts and very, very thoughtful comments, thought-provoking comments. So thank you very much. And with that, I will bring this evening to an end, or evening, afternoon, wherever you are, bring this event to an end. So yeah, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Radhika.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Спасибо.